Welcome to our podcast, Raising Big. This podcast is an ongoing conversation between myself and my young adult son. We're ready and willing to talk about all the things families might experience in their life and relationship, both as parents and young adults, from teens to 20 somethings, the good, the bad, and sometimes the ugly. In this episode, we're discussing lessons learned. What are Cayd and I now convinced is true because of our life experiences? How did each of these lessons change our personal trajectories and how we approach life moving forward? There's opportunity to learn from each other's journeys, and we believe sharing authentically opens up minds and hearts to new outlooks and alternative perspectives. Let's dive into this discussion. I'm Marcy, and I'm the mom.
I'm Cayd, and I'm her kid. My mom has been on this earth longer than I have, but even young adults can have a wealth of life lessons that they've learned throughout their life. Whether your time on earth has been for 20 years, 40 years, 60, 80, or even 100 years. It's been very interesting for me to hear about some life lessons from someone older than me, being my mom, and how what she's experienced over her lifetime has changed either the way she thinks, the way she acts, or what she does with her life. It also can be very helpful to me when I can share my experiences with someone who has maybe experienced something like that, knows someone who experienced something like that, or I can even share a lesson I've learned with her if, maybe I've experienced something in my life that she hasn't experienced yet. And I think that it's really important to have those people in your life that you can have those conversations with and talk about those life lessons with, so that way you can figure out how you can process and absorb those life lessons and take them and move forward with your life. So, Mom, let's talk about one life lesson that you've learned that you would like to share with the listeners.
So we're each going to offer 3 life lessons today. We've learned way more than that, but for today, we're going to hold it to 3 because we know that people have limited time to listen. But for my first one, I want to share is you will figure it out. You always have. So you have a really good track record to date of figuring it out. Otherwise, you would not still be here with us listening to this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So life can bring us all kinds of things, sometimes in rapid succession, right? Sometimes it just seems like you're getting thing after thing after thing. I choose to believe life is happening for you, not happening to you. So even when bad things are coming my way, sometimes fast and furious, right? If I keep that focus and I look back and I'm like, okay, when this has happened before, I have always figured it out. If
Mm-hmm.
something comes along out of the clear blue, right? Unexpected, I've always figured it out. It might happen really quickly that I'm able to figure it out. It might take a really long time for me to figure it out. But at the end of the day, I always have made it through to the other side. So I think having that confidence in yourself to know that even though you've never dealt with this before, even though you might be very uncertain as far as which way to go, what to do, how you're going to get to the other side, right? You've always figured it out before. And so count on yourself to know that you can figure it out again. That might include using all of your resources. So we all have a lot of resources around us, whether that's other people, whether that's information available to us, whether that's finances, whether that's time, whatever that looks like, to be able to use our resources and come to our answer out on the other side is a powerful mindset to think that through, right? So I am going to make it to the other side. I always have before. So any thoughts on that one, Cayd?
For sure. I think the part at the end of "you always have before" really sticks out to me. Like you said, you've made it this far in life. Whether it took you a week to figure the situation out, or a day, or a month, or however long it took, you figured it out before, and you were able to, whether it is a small little bump in the road or a big, life altering thing, you figured it out. And if you've done it once, you can definitely do it again.
Yeah, because sometimes you
For
think you're
sure.
not going to, right? Sometimes we can convince ourselves, especially if something is overwhelming or very scary, we can convince ourselves that maybe we're not going to figure this out, but you will.
Mhm.
You will
Yes,
eventually. So
for
that's awesome. How about you,
sure.
Cayd? What is your lesson number 1?
I was gonna say that kind of feeds into my first life lesson that I've learned, is that there's no right or wrong decision in life. So obviously, when I think of wrong decision, I'm not talking about, doing drugs and, ending up on the side of the street
Right.
with nowhere to live and everything like that. When I say that, I more mean in the sense of, if you are debating on whether or not you should take a job, or if you are debating on whether or not you should, explore a new relationship with someone, or end a friendship, or whatever the situation may be, there's no right or wrong decision that you can make. You're going to have different outcomes depending on that decision. If you're deciding between, 2 different jobs, you're going to have 2 different outcomes, but it's not that one is a bad choice and one is a good choice. And I think that that is just something that I've learned that's really important. And it kind of feeds into what you said of, you'll always figure it out before, even if you maybe do take a job and it ends up being
Hmm.
the wrong, or, maybe not the best choice, you can always make a different decision to then find a different job or, different
Right.
situations like that. So I think sometimes we ourselves and also society put so much pressure on ourselves to make the right decision. And, oh, if I miss this job opportunity, then it's just the end of the world. And, nothing else is ever good is going to ever come to me. So I think it's just really important to notice that there isn't a right or wrong decision. It's just different paths that you go on throughout life.
Right. And, you are meant to learn whatever you're meant to learn going down the avenue you
Mhm,
chose. Right. So even if in hindsight you look back and you're like, oh, maybe things would have been better if I had taken that other job, to use your example.
mhm.
You don't know that. You don't know what would have happened at that job. Like you could have taken that other job and 2 weeks later been laid off. Like there's no way of knowing
Exactly.
what could have happened to you. And so I think sometimes we look back and we're like, oh, if only. But the fact is, you don't know how that story would have turned out either, right?
Mhm,
So there isn't a wrong decision. And sometimes I think people get so paralyzed when they have to make decisions because they're
mhm,
overthinking and overanalyzing and are so afraid they're stuck, right, in fear because they're afraid they're going to make the wrong decision when in reality sometimes staying stuck is a decision, right?
mhm.
That's a decision that you're making. And you're stopping yourself from experiencing and learning whatever it is you're supposed to learn should you have, stepped down either path and been able to figure out what you were supposed to learn.
Exactly. And I truly believe, whether it is God or the universe or astrology
Mhm.
or whatever it is that you believe in, that whatever, decision you're going to make, that you're never going to, that there's always a path chosen for you. And I think that there's multiple paths. I don't think that we all just have one path in life, but, whether for you that is praying or going to church or going, talk to your spiritual advisor, just manifesting with yourself or whatever your, way of that is, take that time, like you said, to kind of sit in that moment of being stuck and say, okay,
Mhm.
what do I really want to do? And again, I think coming to that realization that there is no right or wrong decision kind of takes
Mhm.
that pressure off. And it's just, okay, what's the best decision for me? Or what decision am I the most comfortable with? Or what decision is the most secure option for me and my family? Or whatever, your
Mhm.
weighing factor is. I think that getting out of that right or wrong decision just takes some of that pressure off and allows you to, in my eyes, really make the right decision. Once you have that, pressure off, then you can think with a clear mind and say, okay, this, again, for an example, this job is going to be the best thing for me and my family, or this, moving to this state is going to be the best option for me, or whatever it may be.
Mhm.
I think it just takes that pressure off and allows you to make a more clear decision.
Then you have to make the best choice that you can make in the moment, right? You look at what the facts are in front of you. You have to trust your gut at some point and make that
Mm-hmm.
decision. But I agree with you too, in that I don't think you can miss what's meant for you. If
Mm-hmm.
some opportunity passes you by or you choose to walk away from something, there is a reason why you were supposed to do that, right? And you're still going to get where you're supposed to go. It's just
Mm-hmm.
that your path might look different than what you expected it to. So I love that lesson number one, Cade. For
For
my
sure.
lesson number two is similar to that and builds on that. And it's that it will always be okay eventually, right? Might
Mm-hmm.
take a while to get there eventually. And it might be in a different way than you expected. So I think a lot of us, when we grow up, we think that life is going to unfold in a certain way. And we may even have a very detailed plan ahead of us in our mind. First I'm going to graduate from high school, and then I'm going to go on to college, and I'm going to go to this college, and I'm going to take this major. And then somewhere I'm going to pivot and I'm going to take another major. And then I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
get out and I might get a job in my field or I might not. I might decide to work in a coffee shop for the next few years. I might decide to travel the world. Like we don't know. Same thing when, you get a little older, you might find a significant other to create a life with that may or may not work out. You
Mm-hmm.
may or may not become a parent. Your child may or may not be the person that you imagine them to be when they're born, right? So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of things can change and grow, but it will all be okay eventually, but it may look different than what you imagined. And I think the sooner
Mm-hmm.
you embrace that there is no possible way that you can know. It's okay to have a plan, but you need to embrace the fact that that plan might not be the same as what you imagined or hatched at the beginning. You need to be willing to make those pivots or to reassess or to make a different choice when you get to a certain spot. So it's
For
always
sure.
going to be okay eventually. Sometimes things get better really quickly, and sometimes they take a lot longer. But having that reassurance, and if you look back again at the things that have happened to you in your life, you can remember probably very visibly things that you thought things weren't going to be okay, right? You were convinced that things were not going to be okay, and then whether that's a week or a year or a decade later, right? They really
Hmm.
are okay. And so one of the things I've always asked myself is 5 years from now, will this thing I'm stressing about or worrying about, will it matter? Will it be relevant?
Hmm.
And if the answer is no, then that's the level of attention it's going to get.
Yeah,
If it's something more important and it's a bigger decision, it might get a little of extra
hmm,
attention. But again, I always reassure myself with, okay, it might look different 5 years from now than it does right now, and that's
for
perfectly
sure.
okay.
When I think sometimes, kind of in the example you got of like, oh, I'm going to graduate high school and then go to college and then get this job and then, get married and then have kids or, whatever it is. There's
Hmm.
some people who, knew from a young age they didn't want to get married and have kids. And, but anyway, sometimes I think we think when we look at that life path that whatever it is at the end goal, whether it's, a family or a career, whatever it is, we think that that is the version of okay that you had talked about when you said everything will be okay. But then sometimes when you look at it, you might not have been okay in that situation.
Hmm.
I think about, when I was in high school, I wanted to be a dentist. And right now, at 21 years old, I would be starting dental school right now. And I think about when I was in high school, I thought that at that point I would be okay with that. I thought that that was going to be my happy place. And now I think about it, if I was in dental school right now, things would not be okay. And things in my life right now are okay. I'm working a job that I enjoy. I'm traveling the world. I'm, doing all these fun things. So I think that it's important to realize that sometimes what you thought was going to be okay and how you thought things were going to
Hmm.
work out really weren't for the best.
Yeah, and that leads right into your lesson number two,
Exactly.
right?
So my lesson number two. These are all kind of just feeding right into each
I
other.
know,
We
it's kind
didn't
of
even
wild because
plan
we
that
did
out,
not
but
plan on.
yeah, but it's working out good. But my lesson two is that things will change and that's okay. And that is something that maybe like I would say recently, within the past 2 or 3 years, I have come to realize. And I think the sooner you realize that and accept that, and that was something that somebody had told me, was the sooner you realize that things are going to change and the sooner that you accept the change and embrace it, the better you're going to be. The more you try to fight change and the more you try to resist it or get upset about it or whatever it may be, that's just going to make it worse. Because then every time something changes, it's just going to re upset you. You're not going to be able to handle it. So as soon as you accept that things are going to change and that's okay, it just makes your life so much easier. So that can be a change in life path. That can be a change of feeling. That can be, so many different changes, a job change. There's so many different situations and everything changes in life. The weather is constantly changing. Your electric bill changes from month to month. There's so many different things in life that change and nothing. I heard this quote one time, which this was kind of around the time that I had that realization, was the only thing that you can count on not changing is the fact that change is going to happen. Change is going to happen and that's never going to change. So the sooner you accept it and are okay with that and can honestly kind of learn to find the joy in it, the better life is.
Right.
Because it's important to realize that sometimes you need that change. And that change then propels you into a better version of yourself,
Hmm.
or it puts you into a situation where you are able to benefit from that, whether that's professionally or personally or whatever it may be. So those changes can be good and the bad changes are also going to happen. Those are
Hmm.
inevitable. You can't, you know just for an example, you might be in a relationship with someone that you love very much and you think you're going to spend the rest of your life, and something changes in their life, whether that's their feelings change or something happens, and that change happens. It's a bad change. It hurts, if you were feeling very passionate about them, but it's a change that happens, and then you never know, the next person you meet could be an even better. You just never know, what changes life is going to throw at you. And I think the sooner you accept that, just the more you can enjoy life and embrace that change.
For sure. And I could have never told the eighth grade you who was like, I am going to finish high school in 3 years and college in 3 years, and so that I can enter dental school at a young age. Like, you had a vision that you were going to work 4 days a week in your office and you were going to have a mobile dental truck that went into underserved neighborhoods and
Mm-hmm.
did dental work for free. Like, you had a very vivid vision,
Mm-hmm.
right, of what that was going to be. And I could have never convinced eighth grade you that wasn't exactly the way things were going to happen. And here,
Uh-huh.
lo and behold, so that's a huge growth thing I've seen in you, is the fact that you said, you can kind of now embrace change and get
Mhm.
excited for the fact that something maybe that you can't even imagine right now might be coming up
For
in the
sure.
future.
And I think to kind of tie that into the overall topic of this podcast, as far as parents' relationship with their big kids, is kind of like you talked about. You can't kind of force that change onto your
Mm-hmm.
kid. I'm sure in the back of your mind, you probably knew that something was going to change, that I wasn't, going to become a dentist and live out,
Mm-hmm.
those dreams. But coming to that, experiencing that change in mindset, that change in career path, that change in what I wanted to do with my life, experiencing that change by myself was very important, kind of like you said just now, to my growth and my personal
Mm-hmm.
development. And had you as a parent tried to stop that change and say, oh, you're not going to be a dentist, or even vice versa, if I after high school just said, you know what, I don't want to be a dentist, and you said no, you said you wanted to be a dentist for the past 4 years, you have to complete this,
Mm-hmm.
blah blah blah. If you try to stop that change as a parent, I think that can just stunt your child's growth in accepting that change and being able to then, as a young adult, you know be flexible with the
Mm-hmm.
problems that life throws at you. So I think that experiencing that change and kind of coming to that conclusion on your own that things will change, that's one of the life lessons that I think most people have to kind of learn on their own. And
Mm-hmm.
either you accept it when you're 15 or when you're 34 or when you're 72. At some point in time, you
Mm-hmm.
almost kind of just give in to life and just say, okay, it's going to change. It's not all
Bring
going
it
to be
on.
perfect. It's not. And then I think that, at least from my personal experience, I don't know if you can speak to this, but it just makes life less stressful, and it seems so much less, I have to do this, I have to do that because this is the way things were going to go. Or when life does throw a curveball at you, it's like, okay, well, now this just threw my whole plan off and I don't know what I'm going to do. Instead of being able to adapt to that change and work around it and then create a life that you maybe never even thought you were able to have.
Yeah. And had I, when you were in eighth grade, said, absolutely not, you are not going to graduate from high school in 4 years, you will miss your entire senior year. What about prom? And what about, the honors banquet? And what about homecoming? And all of these things, like as a senior, that in society, we're like, oh, you have to have this senior year. Well, guess what? COVID hit during what was your
Exactly.
senior year. And so you didn't
Mm-hmm.
get those things, right? But you were my child who didn't necessarily need those things. And so
Mm-hmm.
back to it all works out, right? Like, even though you had changed your mind by that point that you didn't want to be a dentist, the fact that you got out
Mm-hmm.
of high school in 3 years still served you well, because you still got a ton of college credits, and you were still able to get out of college in 3.5 years, even
Mm-hmm.
during a pandemic, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it led you down a different path, and to deal with things in a different way. Who knows what that would have looked like if
Yeah.
I would have said, no, you absolutely can't do that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea how. And I had friends who told me, you're crazy for letting him make that decision as an eighth grader. And I'm like, well, he's already called the school counselor and made the appointment at the high
I
school.
was going to say, I kind of came to you a little too late, honestly.
Yeah. And even the high school counselor, who we knew well because she had been the counselor for both of your older siblings, and she was like, well, most kids, that want to get out early, try a semester early, not a whole year, but let's see if we can figure it out and do
Mm-hmm.
it. So, but again, you could have never predicted this trajectory, but I think
Mm-hmm.
all of that change in a short number of years has really helped you to be more adaptable and to be more
For sure.
accepting of when life throws you
Mm-hmm.
either something rough or an opportunity that
Mm-hmm.
you could not have pictured, right? you
Mm-hmm.
you've been able to embrace things, both good and bad,
Yeah,
in that
it
respect.
definitely goes both ways for sure.
Yeah. And I think that brings me to my lesson 3, which is, you don't have to see the whole staircase, just the next right step. So this was a huge one for me. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Cayd, but I think I've helped all 3 of you kids understand this, because, I am a master planner. Cayd's older brother, Sawyer, is a
Three.
master planner. Sawyer is or Cayd is a master planner. Kinsey is not quite as hardwired for that as the rest of us are, although she does like to know the plan and know where she's going. But,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I very much am a visionary. I can see big picture where I want to go, but it would be very easy for me to stay stuck and afraid if I thought I had to know every step along the way,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I have to figure out what my next right step is, which is then going to lead to the next right step and the next
Mm-hmm.
right step. And you're building that staircase as you go along, because like we've talked, we don't know what life is going to throw at us, good or bad. We
Hmm.
don't know what changes are going to happen. I could have never predicted years and years ago of where I would be now. I had a realization the other day. I was, taking my first road trip by myself since having my very first seizure a few years back. And I was like, oh my goodness, if someone would have tried to tell me 5 years ago in 2019 how different my life would look
Hmm.
by the beginning of fall, right, in 2024, I would not have believed them.
Yeah.
All of the things that have changed, all of the things that I've accomplished, the hard stuff that's been thrown at me, the great stuff that's come into my life, like you could have never convinced me. And I would not have been able to tell you the plot line or what all of those steps were to get me from there to here. Now, some parts of my life, like I knew I needed to change them at that point. In
Hmm.
2019, I was like, here's the things that need to change. Then there were new things that came along. As I made one change, it might have prompted consideration of the next. As I built my confidence of, okay, well, I made that change. Now, what else am I tolerating that I
Hmm.
need to address and need to move forward? So those were good moves that I initiated, right? But I didn't initiate my first seizure. I didn't initiate waking up with a frozen shoulder. So
Hmm.
those types of things that just kind of happen to you, even the economy we're living in now, like life is a lot more expensive now than it was a couple
Yeah.
years ago when I made some of the decisions that I made. And
Hmm.
so you learn to roll with it, right? You always figure it out, which we talked about.
Yeah.
But I didn't know what those steps were to get me from there to here. But I had to essentially take that step with faith, sit with myself and be like, okay, I can't see all the whole big picture, but I
Hmm.
do know that this next step I'm going to take is going to get me closer to where I want to be. And that's kind of my guiding principle when I'm trying to make a decision is, does this get me closer to where I want to be? And that where I want to be could be as simple as, who's the person I want to be?
Hmm.
Who's the person I want to be? I was having that discussion with the girlfriend I went to visit this weekend. Like, what do I want my legacy to be? What do I want people to say about me at my funeral? Right? It
Hmm.
can be that simple as, she was kind, she was caring, she was
Hmm.
adventurous, or it could be, okay, she had this podcast that had 700 episodes with her son Cayd, and she coached this many people and she gave this many public, speaking gigs, and
Hmm.
it changed the trajectory of some lives. Like anywhere on
Hmm.
that spectrum, right? I bet you any money if you asked baby Oprah what her life was going to look like, she couldn't tell you, right? What
Hmm.
those steps all were. So, yeah, you don't have to see the whole staircase. You just need to be able to see the next right step. Any
For
thoughts about
sure.
that one, Cayd?
Yeah, I mean, something like I just kind of had a vision in my mind of when, talking about the staircase and talking about the things that life throws at you. It just kind of popped this vision into my mind of like when you have kids and they leave their backpack on the steps, or when you have little kids and they leave their toys or their Legos on the steps and, you step on it. We've all stepped on a Lego and, experienced how much that hurts. So I think that kind of when you talk about like planning out that whole staircase, to where you want to be at the end of your life, you can't see the dog toy that's, on step number 7. And you can't see the backpack that was left on step number 17. And you
Mm-hmm.
can't, see all of those obstacles. So I think that that's why it's important, like you said, to just take that next right step and, take that step up, take that step up. And then maybe 4 steps in, there's, that Lego that you accidentally step on. And
Mm-hmm.
then, you know, you deal with that while you're on that step, and then you take the next step. And I think that sometimes too there can be good things on those steps. You might
Mm-hmm.
be at a point where you hit a step and you're like, oh, you know what, that first step is really close, but that second step I can also get to, so let me just go ahead
Mm-hmm.
and jump to that step, and make a bigger advancement in towards your goal or whatever it may be. I think that just kind of taking that next right step and dealing with
Mm-hmm.
whatever you're on whatever's on that step with you at that moment in time, just as like you said, as long as you're getting closer to that goal, whether it is the career you want or the family you want or who you want to be as a person or how you want to be remembered or what you want to do with your life, whatever it is, as long as you're taking those steps, you're going to end up there one day. And that's really
Mm-hmm.
what the goal is.
Yeah, and it's not a smooth staircase. When you were just talking about the vision you had, when you're talking about the backpack or the Lego 7 steps up, it brought two images to my mind. One is, remember when you were younger? I can't do it now, but when I was younger, you know how sometimes you would take 2 steps at a time and you'd go up the stairs taking 2 at a time? So there's going to be times in our life, right? Which, to piggyback what you just said, where you're going to be
Mm-hmm.
able to make more rapid progress up the stairs and it's going to be smooth sailing. The second image that came into my head was, we had this circular staircase at one of the old companies we both used to work for in our old building. And I fell up that staircase multiple times. the stairs were not even, they had a narrower tread on the inside, they were kind of circular, and a wider tread on the outside. And depending on
Hmm.
where I was at on that stairway and what I was carrying at the time, there were multiple times I fell going up those stairs, landed, hurt my wrist,
Hmm.
hurt my knee, whatever that might be. Had to take a moment, had to take a pause on that
Yep.
step, right, before I could go to the next one. So funny that those two, visions. So we have lots of stairway references now. So, but again, you don't have to
For
see the whole
sure.
staircase. So how about your last
Exactly.
one, Cayd? Your lesson three.
For sure. My last one, which is something I have learned pretty recently, is you only fail when you don't try. So if you try something, whether it is just taking a leap of faith or you have a goal of what you want to do, when you try, even if you don't quote unquote succeed, let's say you're trying to start a business and 2 years in you say, okay, my business is failing, I need to shut down and I need to go get another corporate job or whatever the situation is. You didn't fail at starting a business. You learned something along the way. And that, just for that example, 2 years of having that business, you
Mm-hmm.
learned something along the way, whether it's something personal, whether it's something professional, you learned something along the way. So you didn't fail. You only fail if you had never started that business and you were still sitting at square one saying, oh, I've always wanted to open this bakery and, this is all I've wanted to do. But you never did it. So in my mind, that is the failure. It's not the failure if you open the bakery and then 2 years later business has slowed down and you can't afford to keep it open and you have to shut down because you've maybe met people along the way, you've learned lessons
Mm-hmm.
along the way. So I think that that's something that's really important, and just again kind of ties into everything else we've talked about, is just taking that leap of faith and knowing that it'll all be okay at the end of it. And as long as you try and as long as you put in an effort, you are either going to learn something new, you're
Mm-hmm.
going to meet someone, you're going to make a connection, you are going to, it might even, you might start to open that bakery and then a year through a different opportunity opens and now you're a judge on Top Chef or something like that. And it's something you never imagined. So I think that that is something important, that you only fail when you don't try. So just try, see what happens, and worst case scenario, you at least learn something along the way that then you can apply later on in life.
Yeah, the bakery and Top Chef, also two of your dreams when you were a child. So interesting
Exactly.
that you said, yeah,
uh,
Cayd was going to have a bakery, and Grandma and I both had jobs there. And then he really wanted to be on what was it, the children's version of Next Top Chef, right? That
yeah.
that they had, and boy did he practice a lot.
Mhm.
So, but I bet you have no regrets about all of that baking that you did because you are still
Exactly.
a fantastic baker. And that's
Yes.
at the end of the day, right? That's what we don't want to live with, is regret. We don't want to have this long laundry list of all of these things that we did not try, because you're right. Then that is the failure,
Mhm.
that you didn't try. So I think we'll recap these here. So lesson number one for me was, you will figure it out. You always have before. Cayd?
And then my first lesson is there is no right or wrong decision.
Lesson number two for me was, it will all be okay eventually, and maybe in a different way than you expected.
My lesson two is that things will change and that's okay. You just need to learn to accept it and embrace it.
And lesson number three from me, you don't have to see the whole staircase, just the right next step.
And my third lesson is you only fail when you don't try.
So thank you, Cayd, for sharing your lessons learned with our listeners today. We hope our willingness to be vulnerable in sharing some big lessons life has taught us encourages you to be more accepting with yourself and honest about your own. Share with your parents and your bigs. Learn from each other and support each other when the moments get heavy sometimes. We are all human and learning as we grow. If you only stay where you're comfortable and never risk, you might stay safe. But if you lose the opportunity to experience the best of what life has to offer, which might even be a valuable new lesson. Cayd,
I
any parting thoughts about lessons
Yes,
learned?
I would just like to add, kind of like you said, you can take these lessons to experience the best of what life has to offer and really just embrace your journey. We're all going to have highs, we're all going to have lows, but it's just important to, learn what you can along the way, enjoy the time you have with the people while we're all here, and just embrace, the good, the bad, and as my mom always says, sometimes the ugly. But with that being said, I think that that is a wrap for this episode of Raising Bigs. Thank you all for listening today. We hope you found some takeaways, a fresh perspectives, and maybe even an action step or two in this episode. Above it all, we hope it opens an opportunity for conversation between parents and their bigs. We are definitely not experts, but we can authentically share what we're learning in hopes of making the path along this journey a little bit easier for all of those who are listening. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. Please make sure to subscribe and share with those in your circle who you think might benefit from hearing it. A new episode comes out every week on all of those platforms.
You can visit my life coaching website at marcyhawkinson.com or email me at lifecoachmarcy@gmail.com. I'm also on Facebook at Life Coach Marcy and Instagram at life_coach_Marcy. Where can our listeners find you, Cayd?
My handle across all social media platforms is at the Cayd Berrigan. That is Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all that good stuff. The best way to contact us, whether you want to give us feedback, ask questions, or drop any topic ideas, is to DM either one of us on social media, or again, to reach out on the contact me page on my mom's website. Again, that is marcyhawkinson.com. We appreciate any feedback, topic ideas, questions, or comments that you may like to share. And with that being said, we will see you all next time on Raising Bigs.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.